It's good to see everyone. Ben, welcome to UND.
Thank you, President Armacost. It's great to be here today.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And thanks to everybody for attending as well. This is our continuing series on UND LEADS, broad perspectives. Uh-oh, technical difficulties.
User error.
Yeah. Every time I begin a speech up here,
that one was, I don't know that one was me.
There, wiggle. Okay, we're all set. Good. But the broad perspectives on national security, we're just delighted to have Ben Davies here, who has a tremendous career with Northrop Grumman, and pretty much his entire career was spent with one company, and so we're delighted to have him. We're going to talk all about his work and his views on key issues in national security, and so I know you'll find this to be just a delightful discussion and a chance to hear from one of our national leaders in national security. So Ben, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and let me just say thank you to you and to your team's hospitality. I had the opportunity to spend the morning here, see some of the amazing facilities and the work that's being done here, so it's really exciting time, and I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the discussion with you here today.
Awesome, and you have a connection to this area too, that I learned about over the last 2 days.
That's right, just over the border, actually. My dad's side of the family is from Minnesota, not too far away from here, so very much still looking forward to going and kind of exploring my roots in the area.
There we go. And the question that's on everybody's mind, do you know what hot dish is?
So this was the story we were just talking about. So like I said, my dad born in St. Paul, Minnesota. My grandmother grew up on a farm in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And it wasn't until I went to, we have a facility in Plymouth, Minnesota, and I went there just about 6 months ago, and I became exposed to hot dish. And so I had to go back and ask my dad, like, were you holding out? Was that not something that, you wanted to pass down? And I think it was more the fact that was like not my mom's lineage, so I still have not been exposed to hot dish, so I'd like to try that.
Exposed but not ingested,
That's right.
You know what it is, but have dared not eat it yet.
That's right.
Kathy and I have not had hot dish either, I don't think. 6 years, 5.5 years, 6 years? What? Sorry. Let's move on to the next topic. Anyhow, welcome to UND, and we're so thrilled that you're here. As I opened with, your career at Northrop Grumman started from the get-go. So just give us a quick update on how you went to college at Berkeley, and how did that translate to that early part of your career?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first I would say it's amazing how fast time goes. I can't believe it's been 28 years, but maybe I'll just, for a little bit of context, and maybe relevant to some of you in the audience that might be students, I was getting my electrical engineering and computer science degree at Berkeley in the Bay Area. It was 1997, the summer between my sophomore and junior year, and if you know anything about that time in that area, that was the dot-com boom. So there was a lot of excitement and a lot of pull to consider going into the dot-com internet companies. And I saw an advertisement to go take an internship at an aerospace and defense company that ultimately became part of Northrop Grumman. And what was interesting is it was very much not clear to me at that point in time what my future was, but I was open to the opportunity to go do this internship, and it's been amazing in a couple of ways. Number one is I really realized I didn't know how big companies work, and I have to commend UND and the programs that you have here. A lot of the education is really, it seems like it's cross-discipline. Teams come together, work on these projects. It was very much a learning experience for me being an intern, and what I learned is that I really loved the integration of the disciplines. I love the interface with the customer and the mission, and so I ended up going back and really focusing on becoming a systems engineer. And then I went from being a systems engineer, gosh, probably 20 different roles over the last 20-something years, 17 years in engineering. I've worked on everything from undersea to outer space, every service in the US military, almost every intelligence community customer, many international programs, but then had... That probably was me earlier, wasn't it? But I think, challenged me and exposed me to, taking on leadership roles, taking on business roles, which really to me, I didn't know was my path at the beginning. And what I realized was I just loved bringing smart people together to solve compelling problems and just realize you can do that at the leadership level, you can do that at the business level, and it's just kind of been an amazing ride with, you know, many doors open and opportunities, and it's kind of an honor and a privilege to be in the role I'm in today.
And earlier you talked about the impact that your leaders actually had on you, that unexpectedly they would bring you into new challenges, and that was part of your path.
That's right. Yeah, I was talking to some students earlier. You know, I wish I could say that I knew my path and I was proactive and reaching out and trying new things, but it very much wasn't the case. I was a bit reluctant, and I was fortunate I had some leaders that saw something in me that I'm not sure I saw quite yet and pulled me into some opportunities that really, I learned the most in those opportunities, and you know, I think it's an amazing opportunity in this environment for, you know, our graduates coming out of UND going into industry. I think kind of the world's at their feet, right? I think there's many different paths that are aligned to doing compelling high impact missions today.
Yeah, and backstage you were commenting on current leadership and the culture that's established within the organization. I think it's a really positive story about what you shared with me backstage.
Yeah, you know, so some might ask, you know, it's a bit maybe unique at this time to see somebody who's kind of spent so much of their career in one environment, and we were talking about that, and I think it's really, you know, I would attribute it to at least two factors. One is, there's been many opportunities, so it's never been just one thing, and so being able to continue to learn and grow. But it's interesting, as we all go through kind of the arc of our lives, you know, different things become important at different times, and so I got married and I had a kid, and what was actually really gratifying to me is the company was really supportive of the balance between being successful at work and being successful in life, and so I've never really had to make that choice, and that I really, you know, appreciated being able to have both of those be who I am.
Nice. And today, this morning, you spent a bit of time on campus. I know you were also out at Grand Sky, but here at UND you saw some interesting facets of our work on satellites and unmanned aircraft, and how do you see that work benefiting the nation and contributing to national security?
Yeah, well, I'll share here what I shared with you before is, well, first of all, gosh, I wish we had that when I was going to school. Just the acknowledgement of these critical areas in national defense and having an applied place where students can not just learn the theory, but how do you apply these in very mission relevant areas. And so, you know, when we think about national security or global security, space and air has been and will continue to be the high ground, but it is contested, it's evolving rapidly. And so the ability to take concepts and ideas of mission, rapidly develop solutions, and then get them up and demonstrate them and test them is very much how we're going to be moving forward, and it's really exciting to see that that's exactly what you all are doing here today.
Yeah, and it comes from the efforts of many people in this room pulling together, as you mentioned before, reaching out across traditional academic boundaries to make that kind of work happen.
That's right.
So we're really excited about it. So last night at dinner we talked about a big shift. We're going to turn a little bit to national security, and back in the late teens, there was a decided shift in our nation's views on the threats within the national security realm. Talk a little bit about that pivot that happened, and I think that lays a good context for what we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, that's right. You know, and maybe I'll start a little bit further back than that. I mean, it's pretty apparent that there was a point in time when we were in a Cold War and kind of what that meant. You know, we saw the Berlin Wall come down, we saw the dissolution of the Soviet Union, we experienced the peace dividend, we got into an area, you know, where it was more of a global war on terror than it was the environment we're in now. And if, you know, you track the evolution of the national defense strategy, there was a marked shift in the teens away from that focus to a great power competition, and that's very much the environment we're in today. And so that is a significant shift in terms of, you know, what our men and women in the military need to think about, need to train about, need to be prepared for, but it has a significant impact on the defense industry and what we do here in the defense industrial base that, you know, I think will set the stage for some of the questions we're going to have coming up. But, you know, and it's not a reversion back to the Cold War. There are some marked differences here. We're talking about multiple peer adversaries, not just one, and we're talking about adversaries that have been studying our warfighting techniques, our systems, our technology, and developing their own. And so it's very much a new environment that we're in today.
And of course, the advent of new technologies themselves that make warfare quite a bit different than it was back in those days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so when you think about the strategic environment, it certainly has shifted, and the current national security threats facing the US. Can you comment on kind of the strategic deterrence perspective and those threats that we face?
Yeah, that's right. So very much defined and dominated by two peer adversaries at this point, plus other aspirational adversaries. But I'd say, an acute threat from Russia, a pacing threat from China, but very much both rapidly investing in building out and upgrading their own deterrence capabilities, their own triads in the case of China. And so it very much, when you think about what that means for our systems, we as a nation have enjoyed decades of kind of secure homeland. We've benefited from many of the systems that were put in place decades ago, but the threat environment has changed, the systems are aged, and so, as part of our focus at Northrop Grumman, we're involved in all three legs of the triad, the key foundation of our nation's deterrence capabilities, and we're simultaneously upgrading all three of those legs, and Northrop Grumman is actually the lead prime contractor for two of those legs with the B-21 bomber, the Sentinel ICBM, and I actually have the privilege and responsibility for Sentinel is within my portfolio, and so it's very much, I'll just say these are not one-for-one replacements for the systems that came before for the exact reasons we just talked about. We need to simultaneously deter multiple peer adversaries, and we need to deter adversaries that have also made decades of advancement in technology. And so these systems are very much designed to take advantage of generational leaps and be effective deterrents, not just now, but into the future.
Yeah, and so the global strategic environment certainly has shifted in recent years, particularly with these peer adversaries. Can you comment a little bit more there?
Yeah, well, I'd say, in addition to being a complex environment we just talked about, it's also a dynamic environment. If you look at the pace of change and the pace at which the threat environment is expanding and changing, it makes us think differently. It's no longer, systems that we deployed and then basically stood on watch for 20, 30, 40 years. We can't accept that anymore. The threat is changing so rapidly that the systems that we're designing and delivering today, we're very much in discussions with our customers on how do we accelerate the fielding, how do we deliver them at a higher scale. B-21, we're talking about ramping the production of that. We're looking at ways to accelerate the fielding of the Minuteman system, or I'm sorry, the Sentinel system. But even more than that, we've also made a lot of advancements in technology. One of those areas is in digital development. We had great conversations earlier today about the advances of AI and the tools that we use can compress development cycles. And so it gives us the opportunity to get these systems out there faster. In addition to that, we now can design these things as open architecture systems. And so while the kind of the shell or the basis of the system might be out there for decades, we can be turning very quickly in software and in electronics and other technologies to keep those ahead of the pacing threat. And so that's very much where our focus is today.
Yeah, and back to the deterrence piece. So the American public, of course, has their views on our nuclear deterrent and its impact on national security. Any thoughts there?
I guess I'll say a couple things. One is if you talk to our military leaders, if you talk to the leaders of our nation, the fact that we have had a credible, reliable, safe deterrent for all these years, it's the backstop for everything we do. Our ability to de-escalate situations, to use diplomatic means to an end is really on the foundation and the backstop of those capabilities. I think it's a testament to the effectiveness of those systems that, we have not had to use them in anger. And in fact, if you look at, the relative peace and security we've achieved as a nation, especially in our homeland, it's a testament to the fact that these systems have been effective deterrents for all those years. And so within our team, we say peace is our profession. We understand, that it's a great responsibility to deliver these things, but we want to do them safe, effective, and credible with the intent that it actually produces a peaceful outcome.
And we're hearing similar lines from the current administration and leadership, peace through strength.
That's right.
Which, as you said, peace is our profession. That was the Strategic Air Command motto back in the day, right? Yeah, and so it's being able to project a position of power is obviously quite important. So you mentioned AI, but let me turn attention to these, I'll call them modern technologies, though many of these have been kind of in the works for decades. But AI, hypersonics, and quantum computing. Can you comment on the role that those three key technologies and perhaps others will play in modern warfare?
Absolutely. I guess let me start by, something I just said a minute ago. One of the interesting things, we talked about great power competition. That's, the environment we're in from a national defense strategy standpoint. One of the interesting things about a great power competition is nobody actually wants the conflict, because nobody wins at the end of the day. You have two very capable, or maybe even more than two, very capable adversaries with technology and capability and depth. And so really what a lot of this is about is how would you obtain a decisive advantage quickly? And so advantage is really about getting to a decisive outcome quickly. So deterrence is about denying your adversary the opportunity or the belief that they can confidently get to a decisive outcome quickly. When you look at a lot of these technologies, from a global perspective, one of the big challenges is time and space. Anyone that can cover time and space in a decisive way faster than the other could create an advantage. And so if you think about all these technologies, AI, many applications for AI, but one of them is, can you sense, make sense, and act better or faster than an adversary? Hypersonics clearly covering ground faster than an adversary, and even quantum, many applications for quantum, but one of significant military interest is breaking encryption. Can you get inside your adversary's sensing or decision loops? And so I think all of these are examples, and there's other technologies of how do we, best take advantage of ways to cut down time and distance as we're thinking about projecting power or defending ourselves. And so we have to think about it both ways. One, in terms of how do these technologies, how do we take advantage of these in the appropriate ways to put them into our system so we make sure that we're presenting our users and our nation with the best possible option. We also need to be thinking about how our adversaries are going to be using these things. How do we counter, how do we defeat these types of technologies? So I think they're very relevant topics as we think about what next generation 21st century deterrence is going to be for the next 50 years.
Yeah, and my guess is Northrop Grumman has active work in each of those three areas, and undoubtedly more than that too.
They absolutely do, and I have to be
you have to be quiet about that.
Careful
right?
about exactly what
Next
I say.
topic, please. Right? Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned the future of strategic deterrence. When you look out 10 to 20 years, how does that look to you? And more generally, what keeps you up at night worrying about that future?
When I think forward 10 to 20 years, first of all, I'm proud to see our modernized deterrent systems are on alert and out there operationally. But I'm even more excited to see that we're going to be taking advantage of those open architectures so that the systems that we'll have 10 to 20 years from now won't be static. They won't be the same systems when they're first deployed. And I'm excited to see that. When we talk to senior leaders and when we think about what the future of deterrence is, it becomes integrated deterrence. It's not just our nuclear capabilities, it's conventional, it's both kinetic and non-kinetic capabilities. And I think as we're working with our customers, they're looking for as many ways, as many tools in their disposal to prevent, to deter, and to de-escalate major conflict. And so I think there's a lot of interesting capabilities that exist in the non-nuclear world and the conventional world, but I think non-kinetic is another interesting one as well. There's a way to prevent or de-escalate in the non-kinetic, in the cyber world, that is much less impactful than some of the kinetic options we would take. And so I think the future will be creating as broad a list of tools as possible for our national leaders to de-escalate and avoid conflict.
Yeah, and we'll get to cyber in a minute, but just a quick observation. I worked at Air Force Space Command back in the late 2000s, and at that point, there was very little investment in our ICBM force, our fleet of missiles and their upgrades. And it's great to see that we made the decision to modernize, because those systems, the command and control systems, were old. They had floppy disks to run them, not these floppy disks that were about that big.
No,
they were literally like
the 8-inch.
They were 8 inches, and just stunning. And then they went to USB drives, but now we're at the point where Sentinel's going to come in, and it's probably a much needed upgrade.
You know what? And I had the opportunity at, if any of you were at the AFA symposium, a couple of months ago at the Gaylord, I had the privilege of sitting on a panel with 3 Air Force generals, and we were talking about modernized deterrence and the modernized systems coming online. I actually got a cheer from the audience. As it turns out, there were Minuteman missileers out in the audience,
course,
and one of the questions was, what am I most excited about in terms of what we're delivering? And I've had the opportunity to go to all 3 of our missile wings. I've had the opportunity to go down in the capsule with on-alert crews. I've gone down into the silos. It's very much as you described. If you could imagine 1950s era seafoam green steel cabinets, and you can imagine what that smells like, but we have these amazing men and women that operate, maintain, and defend these systems, and have been for decades, and we owe them the tools, the 21st century tools to allow, and the environment to allow them to do their jobs. Yeah. And I mentioned that, just like the floppy disk was there long after its prime on Minuteman, that's our commitment to them, is that we will move at the pace of technology on these modern systems.
Right, and a public service announcement to the crowd. Outside of Cooperstown, North Dakota, there is the Ronald Reagan Minuteman Museum, and you can go toward it. It's part of the National Park Service. And you can see this is what they've looked like to current day, just about, right? Mm-hmm. Except with this replacement, we'll finally modernize.
That's right.
Yeah, it's awesome. Great work there. So cyber threats, back to cyber. Okay. Certainly cyber threats to our nuclear command and control systems is of interest, and Northrop Grumman is undoubtedly doing some work there, and I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and I would say that's one of the benefits to the opportunity to modernize our deterrence systems is the advent of cyber engineering and cyber threats and the pace at which that's moving. You really need to take a defense in-depth approach, and you really need to start architecturally and think about how you address those types of risks. And so it's given us a tremendous opportunity. We call it the mission defense team, but embedded within the development teams for these critical systems, B-21 and Sentinel, you have these teams that are comprised of safety experts, people that are experts in weapon surety, and people that are experts in cyber. And the considerations for how we make this safe, secure, and resilient is embedded all the way through, from the definition of the requirements and the key performance parameters, to the architecture, to the design, to the features, to how that flows into hardware and software capabilities at every single layer, and then how that's verified, and then creating new disciplines. It didn't used to be that you had a cyber operations center as a discipline that operators of a weapon system needed to be skilled and trained with tools to do, but that's very much part of how these modern network-enabled systems operate. And so I think Sentinel, in many ways, is going to be, really a pathfinder and a leader in terms of how do we implement and deploy these capabilities. And it's going to set the stage as we continue to modernize the nuclear command, control, and communications architecture.
Yeah, and when I think of cyber threats, of course, we all go back to War Games, that movie from the 1980s, right? Where Whopper took over the world. Yeah, exactly. So back to kind of policy issues and the government agencies that are involved. So how do agencies, departments like Department of Defense or Department of War and the Department of Energy come together to achieve alignment in the strategic deterrence objectives?
Yeah, absolutely. So very much a team sport, and I would say that's one of the complex social parts about a program. I'd say there are many stakeholder organizations. I think often we quote there's at least 27 government organizations that have to come together to create a capability like an ICBM. And so everyone from U.S. Strategic Command in terms of kind of the operational priorities, the operational scenarios, the threat, what they need in terms of performance and alert rates, flow down through Air Force Global Strike Command, who really sets the strategic and operational requirements for 2 legs of the triad, to the 20th Air Force and the 8th Air Force. So the 20th Air Force operates our ICBM fleet, the 8th Air Force, our strategic bombers, including the B-2. So we have to interface with them because, frankly, their operators, maintainers, and defenders are part of this system. It's not effective unless it's effective in their hands, and they can keep it on alert and keep it effective, all the way through our acquisition partners, our ICBM PEO. Then there's the Air Force Safety Center, there's the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center, there's the Office of Secretary of Defense Nuclear Policy Community. And then ultimately you mentioned the Department of Energy, who really defined the standards and the interface for the actual weapon itself that we have to integrate to make sure it's not only functionally integrated, physically integrated, but the safety systems are all integrated appropriately. So I would say that's one of the, complex parts of a program like this, is there's a very structured way we need to bring all these stakeholders together.
Yeah, I mean, it really emphasizes what we've talked throughout the day about, and that's, what a system, right? All the organizational pieces and the technical pieces, and you have to absolutely bring a system-wide approach to all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that. You know, if anyone knows like systems engineering and where was systems engineering invented, we actually invented it the first time we developed ICBMs. We realized it's such a complex problem that there needed to be an orderly discipline for how do you take all of these stakeholders, all their perspectives, all the requirements, and break it down into problems that smaller teams can solve and then aggregate it back up and you can deliver a capability. So it was actually, you know, Cy Ramo from the TRW Corporation that's now actually part of Northrop Grumman. And in fact, we every year give a Systems Engineering Excellence Award on behalf of Cy Ramo. But yeah, very much that the complexity drives a level of, you know, engineering process and rigor that's kind of unique to these types of problems.
Yeah, it's pretty stunning. And we also, last night, we covered a lot at dinner last night, but we talked about General Schriever, Bernard Schriever, right, who was the kind of the father of the modern ICBM force. And you had said we deployed our ICBM fleet in what period of time?
Yeah, I'm going by memory here, but you know, I think there was clearly foundational research that preceded this to perfect, you know, solid fuel rocket motors. But I think there was a decision in about the 1957-58 timeframe that said, you know, we're going to go forward with this design and we're going to deploy it. In the first Minuteman went on alert October 22nd, 1962.
Yeah.
So that was the time frame.
Pretty quick.
It is.
Yeah, that's incredible. And undoubtedly, they needed talented people to pull off that work. So I'm going to fast forward to today and talk about workforce development. Mm-hmm. And so tell us about how you find and attract talent to Northrop Grumman to solve many of these challenges.
Yeah, well, first let me say, to do what we do at a company level, if you can imagine, we have about 100,000 employees at the company level. Roughly half of those are engineers. And so access to attract, you know, retain and continue to develop, especially our technical workforce, is absolutely critical. I think you mentioned it had been some time since we've developed an ICBM, and so part of, you know, for this mission and other missions, we need to make sure that we're able to have partnerships with universities so that we have a pipeline with UND and other universities that are developing skilled talent that want to go into these fields. We really focus a lot, and you know, kind of you asked me about my own personal experience, but we do believe as part of our culture that in order to really retain talent and have them be excited and want to be kind of a part of these missions, we need to make sure that we're supporting them both in their career progression and allowing them to be successful at home. And so we try to create an environment where, you know, we create the flexibility, we create the opportunities for them. In fact, we're proud of the fact we're recognized by Diversity Inc. and by Forbes and by LinkedIn as a top employer across all industries, not just the A&D industry. We have to focus a lot on continuing upskilling and continuing workforce development, and some of that is because some of the disciplines that we need don't necessarily come straight out of school. So when we just talked about systems engineering, so we've created, you know, undergrad and graduate level courses that we, you know, provide to our employees to, you know, those who want to go down that path. We can help develop those skills, or it could be technologies changing. So we have curriculum on AI, we have curriculum on, you know, cyber, you know, many of these technologies that are, you know, new and rapidly evolving. Folks might decide they want to go into leadership. We make leadership development available, and you know, we have a philosophy of lead from where you are. So if you are a technical individual and an individual contributor, but you want to learn leadership skills and be a leader amongst your peers, we support that. Or if you want to become a manager, if you want to go into business, if you want to be a program manager. And so I think very much creating that environment where folks can continue to see their path as part of our commitment to the workforce.
Nice, and I know UND would be delighted to contribute to your workforce as well. Melanie's team, I think, had done a search. You mentioned LinkedIn. We did a quick search on how many UND graduates are currently employees at Northrop Grumman. What was the number? So Renee did it. Yeah, thanks, Renee. So 98.
We got to get that to over 100.
We do, right. We can make that happen this afternoon. Any students in the room? Yeah, awesome description, and certainly offering that kind of development in-house is great. And so the courses.
If I can, I want to come in. You know, it's not often, you know, and I've had the opportunity to interface with a number of different universities, and a lot of times, you know, certainly there's a, you know, theoretical education on kind of traditional engineering disciplines. You know, usually there's more uplift needed from us to both kind of educate people, you know, students on the national security career path, but also then upskill them, you know, any of these compelling large programs are multi-dimensional, they're multi-discipline, and it's a team sport. And oftentimes that's some of the workforce development that we do, as new grads come in the door. But, I want to commend the work you're doing. You'll make our lift lighter with the way, you're thinking about, structuring teams and projects.
If you walk around the campus, you see giant signs that say leaders in action, right? So leadership and teamwork is vital to what we do, and we hope every graduate leaves with those types of abilities and skills. So, yeah. So one other question about we've talked about ICBMs, which go high and they come back down, but then there are vehicles that go high and they stay high, namely operations in space. And can you comment about the importance of space operations in terms of this national security framework and what lays ahead in the future?
Yeah, and certainly from a global security environment, space is the high ground. Space will continue to be the high ground. Historically, we've had uncontested access to space. And so over time, because of the tremendous reach and the benefits of space, we've moved many missions up to space, whether they're sensing missions, whether they're communication missions, kind of the foundations for a lot of our global navigation capabilities. Very much becoming a contested environment, and in fact, a warfighting environment. And so the speed at which architectures are evolving, technologies are evolving, and just like, at one point we had uncontested access to the skies, and then we had to learn how to perform all these missions in the air, the same thing is very much happening right now in space. And so, a lot of activity going in the low Earth orbit, high proliferation of new satellite vehicles, compressed timelines to develop and deliver those. But I think it's all in the interest of continuing to ensure we have resilient access to the capabilities that are in space, and that as there's threats to that we can both project power and defend ourselves in space. And so I think it's a tremendous area of importance, not just to the strategic mission, but many other missions. And I think the work that you all are doing there to, get students exposed to, what is the development process? What is the assurances you need? How do you actually put something up in space? How does it survive the launch environment? Then how do you operate it in an environment where you can't go up there and fix it if something's not quite right? And so just tremendously important.
It's a little farther away.
It's a little farther away.
Yeah, exactly. And yesterday we just hosted our Space Operations Summit, where we talked about some of these challenges, both non-defense, so scientific experimentation, things like building crystalline structures in space that you can't build on Earth because you have to build them in zero gravity, right? To the defense issues as well. And so your perspectives I really appreciate, and it's a continuing area of research for all of us. So we're going to turn it over to questions from the crowd here in a moment. I think we have microphones floating around. I see Monica and Brooke, I think, walking. But as they're getting set up, I'd love for you to comment on, it's a very general statement or question, but talk about AI and how it's making its way. And we said AI earlier, but let's go a little deeper on the impacts that you're seeing, how it might be changing the work that your people are doing, and the types of degrees that you're looking to bring in for your students.
Yeah, and I'll certainly be happy to share my perspective, and I say this with all humility, knowing that there's a lot of collective intelligence in the room on the topic. But I'd say there's a lot of things to unpack when you say AI, and so there's certainly applications of AI that are machine learning that can get you functions or estimations that are very useful, and you can do it in rapid time frame. And I'd say we've been doing that for decades. And in fact, really the advancements of the tools, the compute power, the access to the data is just accelerating our ability to find additional ways we can start to apply those techniques. And so whether that's tracking and image recognition and detection, or whether it's like optimization of a multi-link network. I mean, there's all sorts of cool areas now that the tools are allowing us to take that and apply it. I think that the number of areas that we can now aggregate AI to create intelligent behaviors across groups of systems is something that we are absolutely trying to be a leader in, and I think that we are trying to be thoughtful in striking that balance between moving at the speed of technology, but at the end of the day, these have to be resilient, high assurance systems. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to both, take advantage of best commercial technologies while also understanding how do we adapt them responsibly and effectively into the operations and the environments that our customers operate. I think on the other side, it's very exciting, the advent, and maturation of LLMs and then the other forms of AI that, directly translate into productivity tools for our teams. We were actually having an interesting discussion over lunch about, sometimes when you think about, what does it take to develop a very complex system? Sometimes, to just kind of give perspective, some of our large programs might have 4,000 engineers all working simultaneously. And so how do you optimize and get productivity out of, a massive team of engineers trying to work together? In many cases, those AI techniques, massive systems engineering problems where you need to comb through vast volumes of data and try to make sure that you understand disconnects or risks or opportunities in the optimization of the system. So, I think we are very much at the early phases of trying to learn, how do we effectively apply AI to large teams that are working on these big complex problems to just amplify their productivity and deliver faster for our customers.
Yeah, incredible. And your team, the group that you oversee, is what size?
My team in my sector is about 17,000 employees, but we have a program with 5,000 on it too.
Yeah.
So
it's incredible.
All scales.
Yep. The size and scale is impressive. Okay, let's see if the crowd has any questions. Raise your hand if you have a question that you'd like to ask. Right up front. Well done. Sitting in the front and asking a question. You get double bonus points.
Over the past few years, and specifically the last year, we've seen kind of a decrease in global cooperation. Do you think that that's something that needs to change if America is going to remain strong against multiple adversaries, or do you think we can totally survive on our own?
I do think that this is my opinion. There is a strong recognition that we have to bring our allies along with us. And, some other parts of the work that my team does outside of strategic deterrence is munitions and air and missile defense. And I would say I've almost in some of these areas never seen more cooperation and pull between governments. I think all of our allies benefit from strong integrated air and missile defense capabilities, for example. And so I do think that, there's a recognition that in many ways the United States has historically carried a lot of the resource burden and the cost burden associated with developing these capabilities. And I do think that there's a dialogue ongoing around, burden sharing and how do our allies invest their fair share. We're seeing many of our European partners increase to 2%, 3%, some even 5% of their GDP in terms of infrastructure and security. But we're seeing, very strong demand on both sides to make sure that investment goes into joint systems and systems that provide mutual benefit.
Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. As someone who plays a large role in this industry, how are you able to balance the innovation and effectiveness with reliability and risk management?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that, we have to make sure that we're creating the environment where we can innovate. I think, we were talking in an earlier audience about, when we think about how we deploy our research and development resources, for example, I strive to apply at least 10% of the resources in areas that's essentially white space. We don't even know yet if there's a mission need for this, or we really kind of don't know what this technology is capable of. And I think that we try to create enough of that unconstrained environment so that we don't inhibit innovation, we don't inhibit good ideas. I think as we tend to think in terms of technology readiness levels, and as a technology really starts to show promise, saying, hey, we think there's a real application for this, we have this disciplined approach to say, okay, now we need to think about the application of that technology in the environment. And so that environment means, in the threat, in the temperature, in the weather, adverse conditions, nefarious actors, you have humans interacting with these systems. And so I think we try to make sure that we don't inhibit, exploration of technology, but I think then once we do mature it, we try to make sure that we do it and bring all the right stakeholders in to make sure that we're considering those factors.
Thank you.
And do you have a internal fund where you you sponsor internal research and development
We do.
for riskier technologies.
We do.
So there's kind of a willingness to experiment and fail.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I would say, it's an exciting time too that, the digital tools available to us, we can rapidly, in many cases, start to collapse some of those timelines and, start to get to some of those understandings of how would you assure this technology much faster based on the tools.
We see that in other industries too, medicine and so forth, right?
That's right.
Where digital modeling helps you move a lot quicker and
Yep.
without the expense. We have a question over on the left.
Yeah.
Any advice for students who might be worried about AI rendering their field obsolete? We've heard about, especially in computer science majors, being less able to get jobs these days because AI can handle the entry-level tasks.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I chuckle a little bit. We actually had
We talked about that
we had
last
a pretty
night.
phenomenal conversation last night and over lunch today. I guess I'm going to reference a book that I was talking about at lunch called The Second Machine Age. And I guess I don't have a crystal ball, I can't see the future, but one of the things that this book talks about is how, when the steam engine was invented and mass produced and it transformed industries, there was a tremendous concern, a social concern about this obsoleting so many professions. And I think at the time, we couldn't see through to the other side to realize the human race will continue to, be productive. It created new opportunities and new disciplines for people to work at that we just weren't aware of at the time. The book actually really talks about AI in the same way. And so I think that we're in that phase now where clearly we can see some of the work that, humans had done in the past. There's effective applications for AI that does allow it to do that, but it certainly doesn't do everything. And, just like automation has advanced, the field, I think this will be another tool. And it's not necessarily clear in our crystal ball right now what the other side looks like, but I think we just need to continue to adapt and understand how to use these tools that frankly will make us more productive, put us in a position to solve problems that we hadn't otherwise. So I'm optimistic.
Can I offer 30 seconds on top of that?
Please.
So there's some known economic theories that say as a resource gets cheaper, it becomes more widely used, right? So AI is a resource that it'll make us and allow us to do our jobs more readily, more efficiently, and so forth. And rather than doing the same things with fewer people, some would say we'll do more things with the same people. And yet, this paradox, it's called Jevons paradox, says because of our insatiable appetite for that resource, we're going to actually do much more with even more people. And I think for computer science in particular, we're going to need skilled people who understand the infrastructure, the architecture of how to code and what that means, rather than just speaking into a microphone and saying, build me the following. They're going to need the design ability and the thought process developed by their computer science degrees to build this. And I think what this yields is mass customization, that enterprise software is not going to be the whole university system has the same human resources thing, that we'll have the ability to customize, maybe even down to the departmental level, because we have tools that can do it. But you're going to need the expertise to guide that development. And my sense, and Ryan Adams is nodding, is computer science, in spite of what you hear about in the newspapers, is actually going to become more valuable and not less. But that's one person's opinion.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Vig. I'm a PhD student in computer science. I have a question. So I've been hearing this buzzword, digital twins, and I was wondering if you could shed some light on how that's used in national security at Northrop Grumman, please.
Yeah. So certainly you'll hear us talk about digital threads and digital twins. And, if you think about the development life cycle of a big complex system that, one of the unique and challenging things about the things we do is we'll design a system, we'll deliver tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, but then our customers will operate them, perhaps for decades. You look at platforms like B-52, for example, will be greater than 100 years old. The Minuteman has served our nation for 60 plus years. Sentinel's designed to go out till 2075. So the digital thread is one of the ways that we can make sure that we integrate all necessary disciplines to make sure from requirements into design, into certification, into production, test, and operation, all stakeholders can see their thread through the system and we make sure that we can meet all their needs. Now, you get to the digital twin is you've created this great body of digital knowledge on this system now, and then as you deploy it out into operations, you don't want to lose that. And so the digital twin in many ways can continue to be the digital representation of that system. So if you want to know any particular aircraft or system, what it's been exposed to, how it's been modified, how it's been operated, if you want to kind of do an analysis of alternatives of, you know, different things that you can do with it, you know, you don't want to lose that body of digital knowledge. So sometimes people will talk about a digital twin as, you know, kind of maintaining custody and ownership of that accurate digital representation of the system through its life cycle.
Yeah, another great question.
My name is Angel, and I'm a business major here at UND. So I've been wondering, with the rise of new players such as Saronic and Andro Industries, Andro, one of the projects they've been working on is creating Arsenal One, which would be a hyperscale production facility in Ohio, and Saronic recently acquired a shipyard in Louisiana for autonomous shipbuilding. How is Northrop, Lockheed Martin, and other prime defense contractors adjusting to this new industrial environment with these new names coming up?
Yeah, you know, I think there's a couple of dynamics going on, and you could imagine, you know, if you take a step back, we talked about the pace of the threat environment. You know, one of the challenges is the threat environment might, you know, exponentially increase in terms of the demand signal that our customers feel for the need for new systems. That doesn't necessarily mean they can exponentially expand the resources available to put into those systems. And so there's a lot of appetite and discussion now for how do we create an industrial environment that brings in more investment into military and defense systems, attracts commercial capital, incentivizes companies like Northrop Grumman and our peers to invest more. And so I think our customers are being very intentional about how do they conduct the business of the department in a way that brings as much industry capital and industry thought into solving these problems as they possibly can. So you could imagine in that environment, there's companies like some that you mentioned and many others that also see this as an opportunity, and so they're bringing investment, they're bringing talent, they're investing CapEx, and I would say we're very much doing the same thing. You know, in the aerospace and defense industry, you know, Northrop Grumman's a very technology-focused company. We actually, you know, as a percentage of our revenue, invest more than our peers do in some of those exact same things. So how do we leverage AI technology to bring, you know, intelligent behaviors to our customers quickly? How do we invest and expand our production capacity? In my portfolio, I have 2 of our solid rocket motor manufacturing facilities, and we've invested, you know, $2 billion over the last 8 years in expanding and doubling and even tripling our production capacity. So it very much is a high demand environment because of the pull our customers feel from the threat environment, and it also makes it a very kind of exciting and important time for our industry as we're all trying to think about how do we become the best athlete to kind of answer the call.
Who's got the next question?
These are good questions.
2 hands at once. How about in the back? And then we'll go off to our left.
Hi, my name is Kyle Sparks. I'm an undergrad engineering student here at UND.
Can you hold the mic a little closer?
Yeah, I can.
Thank you.
Okay. So with Boeing having won a contract recently for the F-47, it's led me to wonder, what does it look like in the office when there are big companies such as Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop all competing for the same contract?
You know, it's interesting. It might not be exactly what you think because, you know, sometimes we use the term competimates, but to be honest, if you get a program of enough magnitude, you know, the likelihood of one company having all of the technology and all the pieces and all the industrial capacity to do it, you know, is actually quite rare. And so on many of these, you know, you'll find that while, you know, we might compete at the prime level, we might be teamed lower level into the program. And so I can't tell you there's not a like competitive spirit and you have proposal teams and, you know, there's the excitement and the disappointment if one wins and one loses. But I would say there's actually more partnering and interaction going on between the companies that you might think, just because we do have to get to the best possible answer. And so, like, you know, I talk about Sentinel's a Northrop Grumman program. You know, many other companies are our teammates on that program. Other major defense primes support us on that, just as we do on their programs as well.
Sounds like competition between UND and NDSU, in fact, right? We compete vividly and energetically on the sports fields, the football fields and the basketball courts. But then the opportunity to collaborate on research projects, right? So, because it's good for the whole. Very similar.
All right.
My name is Samuel Sakir. I'm a first-year law student. One of the questions we were kind of discussing in the Aviation and Law Club was that our society and most of our systems is heavily reliant on GPS systems, and what happens if those all go down because either the weather or someone decides to launch an attack against GPS. My question is Northrop Grumman investing in any alternative ways in case GPS goes down, such as magnetic fields or something like that?
Yeah, you know, there are many, many layers and answers to that question, but the short answer is absolutely yes. But it's everything from, you know, modernizing and adding resilience to the GPS constellation to, you know, thinking about things like there is more than one navigation constellation up there now. So if you have even if you're dependent on, you know, satellite navigation, if you can accept a diversity of signals from a diversity of constellations, the likelihood of all of them being unavailable becomes much lower. To now think about signals of interest, think about, you know, bringing in other sensor sources, including, you know, visual and optical sensors. And then, you know, you can go to the tried and true. We were a leader and have been a leader in inertial navigation, and we continue to shrink down and miniaturize and harden inertial navigation too. And so I do think it's an area that, you know, continues to challenge at multiple levels the technology and the resilience. And so it very much is an active field that we're involved in.
And I saw one final hand over to our left.
Right.
Oh, Angie, good to see you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I know you had a chance this afternoon to visit with some students, and I know there's a lot of others in the room now. What advice would you give to students who are here and they're hearing this abundance of information and they're thinking, this is an area I'm interested in? What would their first step be? What would you recommend they take advantage of while they're at UND so that they potentially could become a pipeline for your company or others in this arena?
You know, that's a great question. You know, based on well, first of all, you know, I'll say again here for everyone, there's no expectation that you know your path at this point. And so I think absolutely having intellectual curiosity and having a drive to go try and do as many things as you possibly can is, you know, maybe a first piece of advice. I think that that a company, if that's what you want, make sure that you are talking to companies that support that. And so rotation programs, internships, you know, companies that have a commitment to ongoing workforce development and, you know, finding additional career path opportunities for you. I think those become extremely valuable, especially at the early phases of career. My personal path, you know, there was no fixed rotation program when I started, but I started as an intern. And I was telling Dr. Armerkost, I had no idea what a big company looked like and how it worked, and I was actually wrong. And I changed my career major, but then I continued to be relentless and just, I want to try this, I want to try that. I did as many things as I could. And I think I learned a lot, both in terms of, you know, what interested me, and I also kind of aggregated perspective that, you know, made it possible for me to open doors and take on new opportunities. And so, yeah, my recommendation was if you can get in there, do an internship, go work for a company that will let you try as many things as you possibly can.
Well, today was about broad perspectives, and that your perspectives have been absolutely amazing. The insights that you've shared both on broad national security issues, but also what Northrop Grumman is doing to address them. I know everyone in this room truly appreciates the time and effort that you put into preparing the remarks for today, and we're just thrilled that you took the journey out to Grand Forks to see us here at UND. So how about a round of applause for Ben Davies? And I have another gift for you.
Oh my
so
gosh.
This one it's the first commemorative Broad Perspectives on National Security memento. It's customized with your name on it. I'll allow you to pull it out. It was crafted in a modern way on one of our UND 3D printers. There it is.
That's amazing.
There we go. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
we certainly hope that the relationship between Northrop Grumman and UND continues to grow over time. We're just grateful for the time that you spent with us.
Well, thank you for including me in the conversation. My eyes were opened. You have a phenomenal thing going on here. I appreciate the tremendous energy and the focus on the types of things that are important to us. So I look forward to continuing to find ways that we can work together.
Wonderful. And before we get off stage, I want to thank those who made this possible. Vice President Melanie Linder and Vice President Scott Snyder. They're the visionaries for this. And Melanie's team, Brooke Conlin, and I saw Monica Evevold, were actively involved in making it happen. Rob Carolyn, of course, and then the entire staff of the Memorial Union. How about a round of applause for each of them? Well done. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully you have some insights that you didn't have when you first came to this room today. Enjoy the afternoon, and beat the bison.